Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off because today I'll be reviewing and paging through the Castles and Crusades Players Handbook from Troll Lord Games. Will you enjoy the Castles and Crusades modern approach to old school fantasy adventuring? Or should the old school be out forever? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As mentioned in the open, today I will be reviewing and paging through the Castles and Crusades Players Handbook from Troll Lord Games. It's written by Davis Chenault, Matt Golden, and Steven Chenault, with artwork provided by Peter Bradley and Jason Walton. This 240-page hardcover is available right now, carries an MSRP of $39.99, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $19.99. That said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the Castles and Crusades Players Handbook. Few things to point out before we dive on in. First of all, the fine folks over at Troll Lord Games were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's important that you know that. I'm also going to be staying picture in picture up here like usual, so that means I'll be cutting off a little bit of the upper left portion of the book as we take a peek through. We're not going to look at each and every page, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what's in the player's handbook, what I think of the siege engine system that Castles and Crusades runs on, as well as what I think of this player's handbook overall, and if I like it, who do I think it's best suited for? First of all, we can see that this cover is an homage to the AD&D player's handbook. I love that. In fact, this is the 8th printing. The trio of core books for Castles and Crusades, the 8th print run, all have these different homage covers. And I really, really dig that a lot. So let's take a look at the back here. What lies within? Castles and Crusades is a tabletop fantasy role-playing game with countless possibilities. Designed for use with multiple players, Castles and Crusades puts you in charge of the adventure path. Included within are all the rules of play, how to get started in your very own role-playing game, how to run the game, and how to play in it. The Castles and Crusades Player's Handbook introduces you to our easy-to-learn, attribute-based rule system that allows players to choose among multiple archetypes to build their characters. Spells, fast-paced combat rules, and all essential information needed to play a game of Castles and Crusades are in this book. That is no joke. That is very true. I will talk about that. Reap the harvest of unending adventure. All right, let's jump on in. Should point out, I really didn't know much about Troll Lord Games before I started taking a peek at Castles and Crusades. But the only thing I really knew about Troll Lord Games is they were the publisher that the late, great Gary Gygax worked with leading up to his unfortunate and untimely passing. So he did a lot of stuff for Troll Lord Games. And I got to point out, there is a bit of a Gygaxian. And when I say Gygaxian, I'm not talking about the writing style, but there is a bit of a Gygaxian undertone to all the proceedings with Castles and Crusades. Gary Gygax had a certain philosophy about role-playing games, and some of that actually comes to the fore with Castles and Crusades. So we start off with, essentially, what's a role playing game and what kind of dice do I use and things like that. We are going to have our traditional 6 attributes. So we've got our strength, dexterity, intelligence, constitution, wisdom, and charisma. You're going to have your 3d6, and you're going to have a range from 3 to 18 for your attributes as well. So one of the aspects of Castles and Crusades that I think is very cool is it's very modular. So you can easily plug things in, unplug things that maybe you don't care for. So one thing that I had pointed out from the back of the book, all your rules that you need are in this book. In the Castle Keeper's Guide, there are quite a few other character creation options that are available. Here's basically roll up your 6 rolls and then assign them to the attributes that you want to focus on. Something that's also very important to keep in mind with the Siege Engine system of mechanics are the concepts of primary and secondary attributes. So a human character gets to pick 3 attributes to be primary, and a non-human character gets to select 2. And this will really, really come into play with the action resolution and saving throws and pretty much everything within Castles and Crusades. So we jump into our various different character classes, and we've got our relatively traditional fantasy classes here. We've got our assassin and our bard, and we've got our illusionist, fighter, paladin, wizard, so on and so forth. So we'll actually get a section about 4 pages or so devoted to each of the character classes. So as an example, we've got the fighter here. We're going to see levels 1 through 12. We'll also see levels 13 through 24 on the next page. And I guess prior to this print run, that section was actually in the Castle Keeper's Guide. So very cool to see that moved over to the Player's Handbook. So we get a description of the class, the archetype, what is the purpose of this adventure, kind of armor and weapons they can utilize, as well as what abilities do they get because of their class, and then a breakdown of the various different abilities that they'll gain as they level up. I have to say, I find the character creation, especially with the concept of the primary and secondary attributes, to be a bit more in depth and, in my opinion at least, give you an ability to tweak your characters more than you would in base 5e D&D. I'm not talking about all the additional supplements that have been released. I'm just talking in the 3 core books for 5e. I honestly think you have a lot more options to create a unique character, even within that class. Of course, if you're looking for something that's got just tons of various different customizable options for your character, then of course that's 2nd edition Pathfinder. But I think Castles and Crusades has a nice middle ground between those 2. So let's talk a little bit about the actual mechanics of the Siege Engine. Pretty easy to wrap your head around. So once again, you've got primary and you've got secondary attributes. So let's say I'm a fighter and I'm a human and I take strength, constitution, and intelligence, because maybe I want my fighter to be kind of an inquisitor type of character. So those are my primary. So if I have to do any sort of an ability check, right, an action resolution towards my attributes, I'm going to start off with a base number of 12 for my primaries and 18 for my secondary. So right there, anything that's going to involve my primary attributes, I know I need to roll at least 12. Now that's not all I need. So you'll also have difficulty. So difficulty could add an additional 1 to 20 to that base number. So if it's something super heroic, then it's probably going to have a challenge number, a rating of maybe 28. I got to roll a 28 to succeed, maybe even higher than that. On occasion, something might be really easy, and your castle keeper, which is the game master in this case, might provide some sort of a bonus if it's something very, very simple. So, what you're going to do is you're going to, as a player or even as the castle keeper, you're going to roll a d20. You're going to add the level of the character as well as any sort of attribute modifier. So, which can be anywhere from +3 to a -3. And you might have some sort of racial bonus depending on what you're attempting or what's going on, why you're making the roll. And then you're going to total that up. And you need to meet or beat that challenge number. Now, as the castle keeper, you're not going to tell players what that number is. So, in essence, the players only need to know how to add up their die roll, their level, any sort of attribute bonus or negative modifier, and any sort of racial bonus. That's it. That's all the players really need to do. And this is going to be how you resolve everything from combat to saving throws. It all breaks down into a very easy system. One of the aspects, and we're going to talk a bit about the Castle Keepers section of the Player's Handbook, because it's actually one of my favorite parts of the book. They actually discuss it's okay to fudge die rolls if you're the castle keeper, which for many people, that is blasphemy. Not for me, though, because I am a firm believer in not allowing an entertaining session of adventuring to get derailed because of a die roll. No, that I don't allow happening. So as far as we got our races, and we have, once again, our relatively traditional fantasy races. We've got our elves, our dwarves, our halflings, half orcs, half elves. We've got alignment also. So we've got neutral good, neutral evil, lawful good, lawful evil. So we've got the whole AD&D mix of the various different alignments. Also, we get some discussion about deities, not a ton. We get a little bit. Then we get our equipment lists, we get our weapons, and yes, there is that Gygaxian fascination with pole arms, which doesn't really bother me. We've got some rules about encumbrance, not terribly detailed. Once again, if you want far more detailed encumbrance rules, or maybe far less involved encumbrance rules, you can easily plug that in to the system. We get a section about magic, loads of magic spells, tons and tons of magic spells. One aspect of the magic section that's a little disappointing is all of a sudden there's very little art, especially when we get into the spell descriptions. There's very, very little artwork. And the funny thing is, of course, I'm jumping ahead and flipping the pages, and there's art. But as you can see, as we get into the spell descriptions, just flipping on through, you're not seeing any artwork. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but it is noticeable. It is very, very noticeable. Of course, we do have 0 level spells. So we do have cantrips. So that's cool. So you're not going to have, there's a lot of old school vibe to Castles and Crusades, but there's a lot of things that people don't dig about OSR that are not really adhered to. So, as an example, first level magic user is probably going to have more than one spell available to them. First level cleric actually will have spells available to them because old school, they don't. They don't actually get a spell until second level. So, once again, as you can see, tons and tons of spell descriptions. Let's get to, there we go, the Castle Keeper and the game. Once again, this is one of my favorite portions of this book. This is actually the cover artwork from the previous print run of the Player's Handbook. So there's discussion about what sort of game are you looking to play? Are you looking for something that's going to be more narrative? Are you looking for something that's going to be more combat heavy? And there's a lot of really good tips that's throughout this portion of the book. There's tips throughout the whole Player's Handbook. And I will mention that it's very conversational in tone, which I like, except there are some sections where we're talking about like mechanics and things like that. I wish it had just been more technical writing. Just give me the nuts and bolts. I don't need a lot of commentary with that as well. But I love the fact that there's discussion of not derailing your game with too many dice rolls. That's one thing that I see far, far too many starting game masters fall into is, well, I'll just have the players roll dice for everything, and then that decides it. Well, you're the arbitrator, you're the game master, you're the castle keeper, you're the dungeon master, you're the arbitrator. You're supposed to be neutral, although you should be rooting for the players. You should be fan of your players and the player characters. Shouldn't be adversarial. But there's discussion about, hey, you know what? Use the rules as a basis for the game, and then if the rules get in the way, get rid of the rules. If something gets in the way, ignore it. So there's a discussion on how do we go about action resolution with these attribute checks, some examples of attribute checks. It's very important for the player characters to differentiate those primary and secondary attributes, because those primary attributes, they don't necessarily have to be the highest attributes that you've got. In fact, you might do some middle of the road scores for your primary attributes because it makes those actions simpler for you to perform and be successful at. So we get some combat rules as well. Combat is pretty fast moving in Castles and Crusades. Once again, if you want crunchier options, they are available. They are in the Castle Keeper's Guide. But this is pretty much designed to flow relatively quickly so that you're not sitting there with, 2-3 hour long combats, which I know some people love. Myself personally, I find rather boring. So combat, coming up with the difficulty number, you're essentially using like the hit dice or the level of the opponent or monsters as your difficulty. So super, super easy to figure these things out. One aspect of Castles and Crusades that I get the impression is a big selling point for me is it's got a modern approach, but you can easily port over old like AD&D second edition, probably basic and expert adventures. You could probably go to third edition Dungeons and Dragons modules and convert them over. Now, I'm not going to say you can convert them on the fly, but I don't picture it taking you a whole lot of time and effort to just utilize against the slavers, you know, with Castles and Crusades. So we're going to wrap up with an example of play and an index. And that is pretty much what we've got inside the Castles and Crusades Players Handbook. So let's swing on over to the other camera because I'm going to provide some final thoughts as well as my review score. I really like Castles and Crusades. I'm going to tell you right now, if I were looking to run a fantasy role playing game that had an old school mentality, but I wanted modern mechanics, it's CNC. Hands down. Hands down, I would certainly use Castles and Crusades. I think the Siege engine is super easy to wrap your head around, especially for players. For the Castle Keeper, especially if you're new to being a game master, might be a little tricky, especially trying to figure out, okay, what difficulty should I make this? Because it could be anywhere from 1 to 20 or more. I mean, if it's something, you need to be godlike to be able to pull off, you're going to be adding a whole lot to that base number. So I think that could be tricky for some people, but once you get the hang of it, should be really, really easy. If you're a fan of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe let's say you always wanted to play AD&D, but you just don't like those old mechanics, Castles and Crusades easily has you covered. I think this is a really, really cool system. I think this is an excellent book as well, because everything you need is in this book. If you've got some old monster manuals from previous editions of D&D, you can easily use those with Castles and Crusades. Love the fact that it's very modular. You got that core mechanic, and a lot of things revolve around the Siege engine system. So you can plug and play or unplug and not play whatever you like or dislike. And I think that's fantastic. I really do. Some very minor quibbles. As I mentioned, the tone is very conversational, and I like that in a lot of ways because you can tell the authors love role-playing games, and it really does come through. There were just some parts that I would have liked to have just been technical writing, not conversational discussion. And then most of the artwork is good. Some pieces are sort of like kind of uninspiring. There's some artwork of equipment that's kind of like, okay, I guess. They tend to be small images that are just kind of added in. It's kind of like, all right. So those are my minor quibbles that I basically have. The production quality of the book is really, really nicely done. The paper stock is nice and thick, thicker than what you'd find in 5e books from Wizards of the Coast. Be very, very honest with you. And it's also treated. That's why you saw a bit of glare on the pages, because there is a bit of a gloss to the pages as well. All in all, I think Castles and Crusades is perfect for anyone out there who, once again, wants kind of an old school kind of gameplay. And it doesn't have to only be dungeon delves and things like that, but you want kind of that old school mentality where the player characters aren't invincible at first level without necessarily having, the high fatality rates of first level characters in the OSR. But if you're looking for something like that, but with modern mechanics and very easy mechanics to wrap your head around, I mean, you can't really do better than Castles and Crusades. It is that good. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the Castles and Crusades Players Handbook a very high recommendation. I give it a 9.5 out of 10. I think it is that good. It is that entertaining. It's even worth picking up, even in PDF, just to take some ideas from as well. All right. Of course, I've got some other Castles and Crusades titles that I will be reviewing in the very near future. All right, that's it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do, ding the bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also let you know when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Central, right here on YouTube. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for tons of tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. And in fact, it is a newly redesigned thegaminggang.com. So by all means, check it out. All right. Thank you very much for taking some time out to check out this review. And of course, until I see you next time, here's hoping each and every one of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang. Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, that's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.